What questions do you have about Michael Flynn and his conversations with the Russians?
Well, I'm somebody who believes, Allison, that we need to take stern actions with regard to the Russians for a lot of reasons. What they're doing in Crimea and Ukraine and Syria, and they're meddling in the U.S. election. I think we have to. I think we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to understand what their objectives and their motives are, and know that they're not going to have the best interest of the United States in mind. And so what proceeds from this, I think, remains to be seen. I'm pleased that action was taken. General Flynn resigned. President Trump was right to accept that resignation, and now it's important to go about the business of securing the nation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with not only other areas, hotspots around the world, but with the Russians as well.
But as we sit here speaking this morning, is it your impression that Michael Flynn went rogue and acted alone and decided to tell the Russians that sanctions would be eased all on his own? Or do you believe it was countenanced from someone higher up?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure at this point that anybody does. I think what's clear is that Michael Flynn was acting in a way that was inappropriate, and that's why the action that was taken. And I think, as I said before, it's important now that we move forward. There are a lot of national security threats that we face around the world. All you have to do is pick up a paper or turn on your television set, and you see that every day. The world's an increasingly dangerous place, and we need to be focused on what we can do to secure our country, to protect Americans.
On Friday night on Air Force One, President Trump told reporters that he didn't know about the reports that Michael Flynn had conversations with the Russian ambassador about easing sanctions. How is that possible?
Well, again, you'll have to ask them, Allison. I suspect this afternoon you'll hear from probably from Sean Spicer at his daily avail, and those are questions I'm sure that will get raised. But I don't have any knowledge. I don't have any answers to those questions.
I understand, but do you believe that the White House counsel would keep that information from the U.S. president?
Again, I don't have access to the inner workings or the conversations or whatever discussions occurred. That's a question that is better asked of the president and his team, and you'll get that opportunity this afternoon, I think, and I suspect there'll be some hard questions asked.
Absolutely, and I guess I'm just wondering, what does it tell you? What are your concerns if somehow the White House or the Director of National Intelligence wasn't sharing this information about this phone call with the president?
Well, obviously, I'd be very concerned if there weren't, if information that was pertinent to America's national security interests wasn't being shared with the appropriate people at the White House. And again, that's why I think this step was an important one. They made a move, and they made a very decisive move. And hopefully, we'll get more information about the questions that you're asking. Those are questions that have to be answered by the White House. But my concern is, broader concern is America's national security interests and the steps that we're taking to ensure that we're protecting Americans. And I think what hopefully comes out of this is a renewed focus on that. And again, Russia's a part of that, and I'm one of many members of Congress who believe that we need to take strong, consequential action to where the Russians are concerned, to send a very clear message that we're not going to abide or tolerate this kind of behavior.
So in other words, if the president did know back at the end of last month, when the acting Attorney General Sally Yates says she informed the White House, is it fair to say that you think he should have acted sooner in getting rid of Michael Flynn?
Well, again, I'm just not privy to those conversations. I don't know. The questions that you're answering are all questions, or asking, are all questions that have to be answered by the White House. Obviously, they made a decision. I think the decision had happened very quickly yesterday. In response to information that they received, and information I think that Vice President Pence had received in briefings with General Flynn. And I think it was an appropriate action to take. I think it was the right thing for the general to resign. It was the right thing for the president to accept his resignation. And now they've got a important decision to make about who replaces him, and also what we're going to do to keep the country safe. Congressman
Chris Collins was just on New Day, and he said, these things happen. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. He basically said, these things happen. It's a shame. I really liked Michael Flynn. It's too bad he had to resign, but now it's time for us to move on. Do you agree that it's time to move on, or do you think that as Congressman Conyers and Cummings have just said, we in Congress need to know Who authorized Flynn's actions, permitted them, and continued to let him have access to our most sensitive national security information despite knowing these risks? We need to know who else within the White House is a current and ongoing risk to our national security. Which one are you more aligned with?
Well, obviously, I'm fully believe that if you have a member of your team that's not getting the job done, or you have questions about actions that they're taking, that you take decisive action to address that, which they did. These things happen. There's no question about that. There are going to be members of a team sometimes who get out over their skis and have to be reined in. In this case, it meant this general's removal. But with respect to what happens going forward, I think, again, it's important for the White House to be able to address the questions that you are asking, and they'll have that opportunity, and I think many of us are interested and obviously awaiting the responses to those questions. But for right now, my concern is that the National Security Office get staffed up again, that they find somebody to replace General Flynn, and they get about the important work of securing the country and protecting Americans. I think that's what most Americans want to see coming out of this. They know that personnel matters, those things happen, and particularly in a new administration, they're still getting, developing that the inner workings, I think, between the various pieces of their national security team. And in this case, they made what I think was a strong and decisive move, an appropriate move. And now we got to get about the important business of protecting the country.
Very quickly, do you think that we'll hear from Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan this morning on this?
Well, you'll hear from probably the Speaker and from the leader here in the Senate later today. We always do media availability early in the week, and so I suspect, like is the case with the administration, there'll be an opportunity to pose questions of members of Congress and the leadership up here, but I suspect that they, like me, will be waiting to see what the White House has to say in response to some of your questions.
Let's talk about the cabinet. There's been some movement. Steve Mnuchin has been confirmed for Treasury, David Shulkin for Veterans Affairs. Andrew Puzder is still awaiting confirmation for Labor, and as a result of some questionable things in his past, 4 of your Republican colleagues say that they won't be on board. What do you think is going to happen with that nomination?
He's scheduled for a hearing on Thursday, and he'll have an opportunity to respond to the many questions that have been raised. And obviously, with respect to his record, his background, and some of these issues that have popped up, any confirmation process, there are questions. There isn't anybody who comes to this that doesn't have extensive experience in some world, and in many cases that raises questions about conflicts and other sorts of things, and that's the purpose of a confirmation hearing. So we'll find out on Thursday when he has a chance to answer those questions, and then we'll proceed from there.
But do you support him?
Well, I want to hear what he has to say in response to some of these questions. I, like others, have questions about some of these issues that have been raised, and I think in fairness we have to give him a chance to address those, but I'll make my decision and informed on how I think he responds to some of those questions later in the week.
And where are you now on Judge Gorsuch, given that Judge Gorsuch said through channels and confirmed that he was disheartened and demoralized by some of the things that President Trump was saying about the judiciary? Where are you now?
I think that he represented in his response to some of those questions, Allison, that he is an independent judge. Most of us are very confident that he'll be somebody who judges impartially. He's very well qualified. He's somebody who's in the mainstream. If you look at the decisions that he issued, the 800 opinions that he wrote as a member of the 10th Circuit, 98% of those were unanimous, and that's on a divided court with 7 members appointed by Democrats, 5 by Republicans. And when he was appealed to the Supremes on 7 and 8 cases, the Supreme Court upheld his opinion. So this is somebody who has a great record, and I think deserves an up and down vote, and I hope that Democrats here in the Senate will permit that to happen, just in the same way we allowed the judges that were put forward by President Clinton and President Obama in their first terms to get an up and down vote in the United States Senate. Well, but not
Merrick Garland. I mean, look, you're changing the timeline. As you know, Democrats are very angry that Merrick Garland was sort of twisting in the wind there for 10 months.
Well, there's a big difference, though, Allison, between and vacancy that occurs in the middle of a presidential election when people have already voted and the start of a presidential term. You look at President Clinton, President Obama, their first terms in office, they had 2 vacancies on the court. All 4 of those nominees were appointed to the court or voted onto the court without a filibuster in the United States Senate, and that's the precedent we want to see continued.
Senator John Thune, thank you very much for rolling with all of the breaking news with us.
There's a lot of it today.
There sure is. Thank you very much for
Thanks,
being
Allison.
on Nude.